Welcome to the Anxious to Secure podcast. I'm Yula, your anxious attachment style coach. I'll help you to finally stop overthinking your relationship by overcoming your fear of being left by your partner. Thought by thought, action by action, now episode by episode. Why? So you can experience true, authentic, anxiety-free love and feel a lasting ripple effect in all areas of your life. Are you ready to become the best secure version of yourself? Let's go. Welcome to episode 14 of the Anxious to Secure podcast, another Mythbuster episode, and today's myth is your anxious attachment is your parents' fault. Hey, I'm Yula, your anxious attachment style coach for high-achieving, ambitious overthinkers who want to become secure in their relationship and first within themselves. So if you've started your journey into healing your anxious attachment style and want to become secure, you've probably tried to understand the roots of your attachment style, right? When did I become securely attached? When did I develop relationship anxiety? You might have realized that it's so empowering and really important to understand how your attachment style was built, how it was created, because when you realize that the trigger is more to do with your past and about your childhood, and it has actually less to do with your partner, you can stop taking things personal, and you can help you so much to work through the trigger. So it's less about his inconsistent behaviors or hers or theirs when he doesn't communicate well, or when he doesn't shower you with compliments daily, when he doesn't speak your love language, or he isn't able to comfort you the way you kind of wanted or needed. Maybe even you thought, hey, I had a great childhood and I didn't feel neglected, or I can't imagine how my anxious attachment style was even developed, and I can't imagine it was my parents' fault at all. And that's what I always thought. My parents were very warm and loving, and I really have no idea why I'm anxiously attached and how it all started. If this sounds like you, welcome to the episode where we're really busting the myth that it's always your parents' role and it's always their fault who really created your anxious attachment style. And today's topic is one I've explored deeply with my clients in one-on-one coaching, and also something I really developed for myself and I touch on in my Anxious to Secure course, because I think it's really important to go into depth into how it can be created, because it's not always, I don't want to always touch on the very typical examples. I also want to, everything has so many shades of gray, and it's not as simple as it might look like in theory. And while coaching is really about the present and preparing you for a, really fulfilling future without anxiety taking over, we can't really deny that the present is often shaped by little moments, from like maybe 25 years ago, 30 years ago, depending on how old you are. So it's all based on your childhood and how, especially the early years, has been, developed, like how you grew up. And the powerful thing is you don't have to let those moments really define or control you anymore. You can move forward, heal, and create the secure attachment you deserve now. So let's dive into today's myth. Your anxious attachment is your parents' fault. So let's start with the role of your parents in shaping your attachment style. And it's true that attachment theory tells us our childhood caregivers, maybe your mom or your dad or whoever raised you, played a big role in shaping our attachment style. I can't deny that at all. And understanding this is a very, big part of this whole puzzle piece. It can help us connect the dots and really bring clarity in our patterns, how we think and feel and act in our relationships, in our romantic relationship, or also like with friends and colleagues and stuff like that. But there's a lot more to that part, and let's talk about that more in depth. So I think by the end of this episode, you'll have a bird's eye view, like a big picture view of how anxious attachment develops, and examples of really how both childhood and now when you're older can all the experiences together can shape it, and also you can really fill the blind spots, and so you can then more detached from the experience right now, from the trigger, when your partner triggers you right now and realize, hey, you know what, this hurts and it sucks and I can address it, but the actual root cause of the pain lies in my past. So let's go. The bird's eye view. Let's zoom out for a second. So attachment theory explains that our attachment style... Okay, can you hear the dogs barking in the background? I'm sorry. I actually changed my setting here, my recording platform. It's Riverside. By the way, I'm not hosted by them right now. Sponsored, I mean, because I noticed that during my first episodes, the recording was very strange. And now I changed the settings, and you can hear now background noises more, but I feel like it's much more crisp. It doesn't cut out sometimes when I speak or like add weird things in between. So sorry about the background noises, but I think it's now a better recording, although you can hear everything in the background. So anyway, back to my episode. So your attachment theory explains, that your attachment style starts forming when you were just a baby, right? When you are born, you're completely depending on your caregiver's responsiveness, on their warmth, on their reactions to meet your emotional and physical needs. So how your primary caregivers, usually your mom or then also your dad, responded to your needs when you were hungry, when you were scared, when you needed anything, is really the foundation of attachment patterns. So that's really important to understand. If your mom was warm and responsive and, didn't take hours to respond to you, was quite consistently there for you, you probably developed a secure attachment style because you felt safe and you felt safe exploring the world, because even if you were kind of taking risks, you knew your mom would be there to hold you, to comfort you, and to support you. And yeah, you knew she was there when you needed her. There was a secure base. But if this pattern was inconsistent, so sometimes she was very loved and attentive, and sometimes she was unavailable. Maybe a couple of nights she completely slept through, let's say, and you were crying and you needed her. Or sometimes she was very anxious, and, as a baby, when your mom is anxious, that's a threat for you, right? Because you were overly depending on her for your survival. So if your mom is extremely anxious and overwhelmed with the world and everything, that's a risk for your survival. So then you might start to be clingy, crying a lot to get her attention more. You might panic to get her attention, which then later, manifests in your behaviors too. This is how you then develop you call it sabotaging behaviors, but that's just coping methods, right? And that's where, the anxious attachment begins. And now I want to go into 10 ways how parents might shape your anxious attachment style. Because before we go into, the ways what other patterns are, how your anxious attachment style can develop, I think it's more important that we first understand the foundation, how your parents can shape it more. So here are now 10 examples how your parents can be involved in creating your attachment styles. For example, being left to cry as a baby without comfort. And again, these are examples more that are not happening once. If something happens once, it doesn't hurt you long term. But again, it's through your beliefs are shaped through repetition and emotion. So just to point out, the stronger the emotions you felt in that moment, and through repetition, this is how your attachment style was built. This is how you build new beliefs and change old beliefs as well. So this is just to not worry, in case you overslept once when your baby was crying, don't worry about that. That's fine. That can happen. But if this happens more often, and that can create different beliefs for the baby. So another example is having a caregiver who was emotionally cold or unavailable consistently, or experiences long separations due to illness or work when parents go on longer work trips, or if the dad is having work projects where he's suddenly here and suddenly he's not there. And a baby or a kid wouldn't understand that. Or if this happens to the mom as well, because I think the mom is even more important to the kid, because, that the bond is even stronger. And if the mom is, for example, in hospital, or there's an illness there where she can't suddenly take care of her kid, that also can create a strong experience for the kid and can shape it. Something that can shape the attachment style in kids and babies as well as experiencing that parents argue. This can create a huge amount of unsafety because, again, if the kid kind of realizes my parents arguing, they're in distress, this will impact your kids' nervous system too, because kids can't self-soothe themselves. They're only feeling safe through co-regulation. If your parents fight, they're dysregulated, which then dysregulates the baby's nervous system. And if the baby then thinks, oh my God, my parents are fighting, they can't take care of me right now, they take everything personal, and babies, because they can't rationalize things. Their brain's not developed in that sense, and that even happens later on for kids. It's a very unsettling thing to experience the parents fight, feeling ignored, overlooked, because of maybe their parents not prefer, that's a weird word, but often take care of the siblings, because maybe one sibling is the loud one or the rebellious one. So you, as the good child, let's say, you don't need as much attention, or one kid sick, so your parent has to overly pay attention to your brother or to your sister. That can also create, some anxious attachment in you if you never felt like you were a priority, or you're wanted, or you're loved. Again, as a kid, you don't understand that yet, that your brother needs more and extra care. And again, parents always do, I think, in my eyes, the best they can to really take care of, of their kids. And it's so hard. But again, as kids, we can't see that. What are other examples? Maybe a parent is being very loving in one moment, very dismissive or snappy in the other moment, when they're very overwhelmed and multitasking. Maybe they're working, maybe they're cooking, and then your mom is suddenly snapping at you. And this doesn't, again, happen once or twice, it happens repeatedly. Maybe you're hearing often like you're too much, or you're too sensitive, or to stop crying, or to stop doing certain things, where you felt like you're too much, or you have to hold back certain things from your character, certain parts from yourself, and you have to kind of show up as a different version of yourself, and you can't be who you are. Another micro example is when you're not getting comforted after being scared or hurt, or after you're crying, when you're, for example, very hypersensitive. I was personally a very hypersensitive kid, and I'm very hypersensitive still. That's not something that goes away. And I was personally crying a lot. I was crying a lot because of minor things. And everything was just too much and was overwhelming for my nervous system. And my mother just literally couldn't be there for me all the time. And I was crying a lot in my room, felt alone, and was just, I didn't know how to cope. But also I didn't let anyone in, really. I was trying to cry without anyone noticing, because I felt embarrassed. So of course I felt I was alone and not comforted and not supported, but I didn't let anyone show this, really. So, that's actually a point for later on. That's not your parents' fault. Again, now I actually mixed this point up. So this is actually for later. Let's say if this would be more your parents' influence, let's say if I would have been crying a lot and my parents wouldn't have comforted me, and they would have looked at me and would have just been on their phone or ignored me on purpose, or simply just because they have to deal with their own stuff. And then a parent maybe putting a lot of pressure on their kid, to be perfect. So the kid thinks, they need their approval. There's a lot of very hypercritical parents out there who come from a loving place and want their kids to be, very good at achieving all of the things. But it can create a lot of pressure for the kid and making them feel they're not good enough. And these are just some examples that can shape the kids' attachment style. And again, only through repetition and emotion you can create and shape someone's attachment style. Hey you, if you're multitasking, come closer. Are you tired of obsessing over your texts from your partner? Are you constantly checking your phone every 5 minutes? Are you overthinking every message they send? Are you feeling abandoned when they don't text you back right away or take too much time to respond? Imagine feeling like this in 21 days. Calm when they're texting or when they don't text. No more anxious spirals. Knowing their silence really doesn't mean anything about your self-worth and that you're still safe. Watching your partner become more obsessed with you because of your new energy. That's exactly why I've created my mini course on text anxiety. The only one you'll ever need to learn how to stop obsessing over text in just 21 days or less. The first round of my beta course is open, so grab your spot before the price goes up, and let's transform your relationship anxiety one text at a time. How? Either find the link in my bio or jump over to my Instagram and comment under any of the posts the word text anxiety. And when you start to understand where your attachment style, where your anxiety comes from, it's like flipping, like a light switch on. Suddenly your triggers make more sense. Yeah, for example, you might realize that your fear of being left unread, like on a text message, isn't about the text actually. It's tied to the times when maybe during your childhood you felt unseen or ignored or completely left out in a group, or by your parent, by your dad, who was always buried in work and you tried to knock on his door and he just, he had work meetings or something like that. So really realizing, hey, this trigger has much more to do with my past. And when you can, connect those areas, those dots, so you stop seeing the present moments as the enemy. You stop seeing your partner as the enemy. You start to break the cycle, and that's where really the true work really begins, and you start to where everything becomes easier. And that's where I want to share with you some journaling prompts and questions you can also ask your parents. These are questions that help me to understand my own roots. In fact, these are the exact questions I've asked my mom, I think a few months ago, when I tried to connect my dots and I wasn't sure where my anxious attachment style came from. And I was a little nervous to ask her because I didn't want to make her feel it's her fault. That was important for me. And I didn't want to make it sound like I'm judging her. And I really had no idea how to ask the right questions. But in the end, it was super easy to chat, and I realized so much more about myself. So I think it's really helpful to realize, hey, this is possible. These are possible moments when your attachment style could have been shaped by, and there's actually no shame in asking. I highly recommend to anyone just to do it and not to overthink this, as I did actually. And she actually told me that, my allergies and hypersensitivity probably played a huge role and factor in my attachment journey. And I've created questions that don't put blame on your parents or to make them feel guilty, but to really ask from a place of curiosity about what kind of challenges you were going through, perhaps to get the bigger picture. And I'm going to link them here on the podcast again, or you can go to the Anxious to Secure coach on Instagram and reply to the posts or Instagram reels, the word roots. So the word roots to get my journal prompts on the questions to find out more about yourself. And let's jump into the micro examples of other factors that can impact your attachment style too, to really get the full understanding, to know, it's not just my parents' fault, or it's not just them who influence my attachment style. It's also possibly through a lot of other factors. So you can really get a bigger picture of what shaped me nowadays. So for example, witnessing someone important like your mom or sibling being sick or in danger, that can really shape your anxious attachment style as well. Or feeling unsafe in your body because of allergies, health problems, or hospital visits. That's something a lot of my clients experience as well. When you were sick or even had an accident when you were little and you were either physically separated from your parents, or you literally had physical or mental health issues, that can create a lot of fears. let's say you're in hospital, first of all, and your parents are not there. You don't know that your parents are not there because you're sick, because you're taking it personal as well. And then hypersensitivity and interpreting everything as a threat. So I'm hypersensitive, and I've talked about this a lot as well. But if you're sensitive to anything, light, noise, external situations, smell, how people look at you, like I'm very hypersensitive to a lot of things. Right now, someone is out there in his car and using his, what's it called, horn, making a lot of sound, and can't deal with his own anger. And for me, this is just crazy how people just think their way of handling their own anger is just to try to force other people to drive faster or park faster. And you know what? You can only control your own self. So I'm not getting angry when I hear that, but when I walk outside past cars and they're using their horn next to me, I'm just very sensitive about noise, and I'm not going to shout back at them like they would, but it's just very crazy for me to think people go through the world shouting at each other like that and thinking they can just, they're not focusing inwards and see, hey, what can I deal with my anger right now? They're focusing on trying to change the world, change other people. So for example, as someone who's hypersensitive, I used to live in London. And when I started with my chronic migraines, the light and the neon lights in the trains was enormously painful for my eyes and triggered a lot of migraines. So what can I do instead, right? You can't change the lights. I couldn't always change my path to work or at work, the neon lights inside. I tried to talk to management about that, and sometimes we swapped out some light sources, but in the end, I just had to focus on what I control, like wearing sunglasses inside or things like that. Imagine as a little kid, being hypersensitive to other things, seeing everything as a threat. This can also shape your anxious attachment style. Or being in a chaotic environment with lots of stress around you, this can also shape you over time. With stress around you when your parents were shouting, or if you were just generally grown up in a hectic city and you were outside a lot and people were screaming, you heard sirens, all of this. Maybe having a babysitter who wasn't always the same, but always maybe different babysitters. Or maybe you were sent to daycare with strangers and you just didn't know them. And some of them were okay and warm and loving, and then sometimes they were not, like constant change and constant strangers. What else can influence your attachment style? Being often separated from your family, maybe because of, again, medical issues. Something else that can later reinforce your anxious attachment style is bullying, being excluded in class as a kid, also in kindergarten. If you were having a very loving environment, maybe where your mom was overprotective because she was trying to protect you from all the harm there is, and then suddenly you're going out into the world in kindergarten and you're being exposed into the kind of the normal world where some kids are nice, but some kids are not. They're just kids, right? They're saying how they feel, what's going on. That could have been very triggering for you if you were growing up in a bubble, even during COVID time, and then suddenly you're exposed with all of these, for you, very dangerous reactions. Some kid takes your toy away, and the other kid pushes you. It can be triggering for you as well. Is your partner's inconsistent behavior or lack of reassurance driving you crazy? Guess what? That's not the real problem here. The real issue is your abandonment wound, the deep-rooted fear of being left behind. What if they leave? What if I'm not a priority? What if someone else has their attention? What if I'm actually not good enough? I've been there. I used to take it so personal. My partner came home from work and didn't want to interact with me when he jumped on his PlayStation, when he didn't prioritize me. But here's the thing, it wasn't about them. It wasn't about him. It's about our anxious attachment style leading up to meeting unavailable people, chasing them. And their behavior only rubs our own wounds. If you're ready to go from anxious to secure and stop overthinking everything they do, then listen up. Stop overthinking their interactions. Stop chasing reassurance. Stop doubting your worth because they haven't kissed you in a while, and start feeling calm and in control, seeing your worth, attracting genuine love, or re-attracting your partner again, your avoidant partner. If you want this, if you want to transform your anxious attachment style and become securely attached, then I'll share with you all my secrets, how I went in just 6 months from anxious to secure. Head to the link in bio. You got this. Maybe losing a friend or family member suddenly, or someone moving away from you. That can be stressful for you as well, if they were your only friend especially. Things like this. If you experience rejection in a lot of friendships when you were younger, or a lot of change, maybe you changed a lot of schools, homes, home is very unstable, even losing a pet, grief, just something that really created a lot of emotional distress for you, could have also shaped your anxious attachment style. And attachment styles are really built through repetition and emotion. So the stronger the emotional impact has been for you, the more it can really shape you. And let me show you a little story. So when I was a baby, I had strong allergies. I was in and out of hospital a lot, and my mom said I was, extra sensitive to everything. I was shy, and I would hide behind her whenever she had a friend over. And I didn't understand at that time, but I learned to feel like my mom wasn't around, or if she was stressed, something was wrong. So my little brain probably thought that this meant I wasn't safe, right? So looking back, I realized that the way I felt as a baby, like, my parents couldn't take care of me, apparently, stuck with me. And again, my parents took care of me very well. But as a baby, when I had allergies, I literally didn't feel safe, of course. So I'm not blaming anything to my parents. I'm just making this very, very clear. But you take everything personal as a baby. But it kind of got, apparently, I think, subconsciously to believe, hey, I'm not safe. And I didn't get really what I needed. So I must have developed the core belief I wasn't good enough and something is wrong with me. So it's really wild how this all fits together. At least this is the only way I can explain how my anxious attachment style really was developed. And then how it got stronger. My parents had arguments later on, or my mom was really stressed. That kind of reinforced everything, my fear, and especially because I was hypersensitive, that made it even stronger. And to me, it must have felt very upsetting or dangerous, and I couldn't separate my emotions on my own, and I couldn't self-soothe. And that's how I explain it, at least, because I can't really remember many memories from that time, just a few. And it's not always easy to remember everything for myself. And as a kid, I felt the world was full of threats, especially, if you're hypersensitive, everything is kind of dangerous, right? So about my school time, I personally had also a very hard time fitting in at school. I never felt I fitted in, and I always felt like an outsider, and I never felt good enough. And this belief, because it started very soon, very early on, just reinforced in all areas of my life. I felt never good enough when I had to read things out loud, like a book. I think that was one of my earliest memories, really, when I didn't feel good enough. I think must have been class 2, class 3, class 4, very, very early on. And I was just already insecure there. And later on, when I got bullied, that just got stronger and stronger. And I wasn't bullied in an extreme case. I think there were other stories which are worse, but because, my hypersensitivity played a role, I think that's why it felt so strong and so much worse than it would have been maybe for other kids. And I just felt even more alone. And then, I created a story in my head that nobody liked me, everything's so hard for me. And that I could never just fit into a group. I would never be that girl who's just confident and pretty and who has it easy in life. And somehow that I need to try harder, and that I need to do everything to make people like me, to fit in. And so I replayed conversation in my head of what I just said. I was beating myself up and criticized myself. Yeah. And I remember also a lot of times and crying in my room and feeling overwhelmed, and that pain of like not able to know how to cope with this was really intense. And I also felt very ashamed, and so I never really opened up to my parents much, and I never learned how to cope with emotions, how to cope with when you cry. I just remember exactly the feeling when I cried. It felt so, so, so painful. And I was in this spiral where I just didn't know how to end this endless crying over something. Nowadays, I know exactly how to get out of it so it doesn't get worse and worse and worse. But at that time, I just didn't know how to do it right. And I understand now also why for kids it's so much worse, because kids literally need someone else. They can't self-soothe themselves. And I just didn't know that. I think it's such an important thing to learn, to know. Kids need someone else to feel safe. Go back to, this ventral vagal state of safety and connection. And yeah, now looking back, and I wish I would have told myself, like, it's okay to cry and it's okay to feel it. And I don't have to hide it, and I can reach out to someone as well, and just to breathe through it and to stop spiraling by just, telling myself, by challenging my stories as well, because I was telling myself all of these bad things, like as if they were true. I was keeps telling myself the limiting beliefs that everyone hated me and I'm so ugly and I will never fit in and all of these things. And the more you're feeding yourself these stories, the more you will be in it. And yeah, through life, you reinforce these stories. Like when I was bullied in school, right? A friend turned their backs on me, or even in relationships, I felt like my partner was distant or unavailable. You reinforce your anxious stories. You reinforce your limiting stories to yourself, like that I wasn't good enough. Every time when something happened, I felt like, hey, there's the proof of that, right? You're feeding your anxious loop of never feeling safe, never feeling okay, never being capable of handling this. But now looking back, I see how all of these things, the bigger things and the smaller things build up to, my anxious attachment style, and how I kept reinforcing my belief that I wasn't good enough and that I'm not as pretty or smart as other people, and how loneliness is painful. And yeah, and the more I think you really understand about your past and how your triggers were created, the more you understand about yourself, the more you can detach from the current situation, the current trigger. And I think that's very powerful. And the good news is you don't have to stay stuck in these patterns. It's so, so amazing to know. Understand really how your anxious attachment style form is just the first step. It is really. And the real transformation comes when you begin to rewire your beliefs and to learn to process your emotions and to release them, and healing your wounds, your abandonment wounds and your unworthiness wounds, and to start to feel secure in who you are. Security doesn't come from your partner's words. Security really comes from you, by learning you are already safe, even if someone says something stupid, even if someone looks at you weird, even if you fail at something, and even if someone, doesn't reassure you, doesn't text you back fast, even if you're being left or rejected. Nothing changes about how amazing you are, but you just need to find proof for yourself. The more proof you are built up in for yourself and you are able to find the proof, the more you feel it too. But right now you only focus on all of the negative things, and that's where I have been too. So I totally understand that. So the goal is here not to blame anyone, not your parents, and also not your past or your partner, but it's about gaining understanding, and it's about really seeing the full picture of your attachment story, so you can really begin to heal. And your parents did the best they could. I really believe in that. And even if it's not your parents, even if you've been maybe adopted or been growing up in foster environment, I think it's really important to forgive the past. And let's say if your parents had to, let's say, give you up, that didn't do this because you're not good enough. They couldn't cope with themselves, they had enough problems and they thought they're giving you a better future because they're having too many issues. So never reinforce the belief that you're not lovable or you're not good enough. And it has nothing to do with you. and everything to do with them. But I understand your pain because a lot of my clients come from that kind of past and environment. Understand now that you can process, those kind of emotions and pain and then move through it. So now that I talked a little bit about the childhood experiences, how they play a role, I want to talk a little bit about something else. So while, childhood can set the stage, other life experiences can also, reinforce everything. For example, thinking about the first time you got your heart broken, or experience like a betrayal can also reinforce your anxious attachment style. The moments can leave you scars that trigger older attachment wounds as well, right? If your early childhood was loving and great, but then you experience a lot of betrayal and heartbreak in your early relationships, that can also create actually an anxious attachment style, especially if it was really, really strong and heavy. And usually your anxious attachment style is already created between age 0 and 7, but it can be created later, but mostly reinforced later. So at the end of each episode, I'm going to give you, a few action steps that can really help you becoming securely attached 1% at a time, episode by episode. And for today, I invite you to think about, what experiences in your childhood stand out, for yourself that shape your anxious attachment style, and what life experiences, also positive or negative, might have reinforced your attachment style. Maybe some of them have shaped your attachment style to become more secure, and maybe some experiences have shaped you more to become more anxious and reinforce your anxious attachment style more. It's really, really powerful to write this actually down, on a piece of paper. And, how have I been reacting in relationships out of fear of abandonment or not being good enough? Write these down as well and ask yourself, how can I begin shifting from fear-based responses to more intentional actions that reflect a secure attachment style, right? Like, think about how would a secure person think, feel, and act in those moments. And again, you can head over to my Instagram, to the Anxious to Secure Coach, and reply roots to find out about how your attachment style was developed and filling these gaps and trying to also understand more about things maybe you didn't know about. And something like takeaway. And thank you so much for this episode. I hope you got a little bit more understanding of your roots and how your anxious attachment style has shaped you. And I'll see you in the next episodes where we talk about triggers and how different attachment styles would react to the same trigger. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for being with me here today. Remember, change in your relationship starts with you. Thought by thought, action by action, and now episode by episode. If you love this episode and want to give me a virtual high five, please give me a 5-star rating wherever you're listening from. It really helps me to boost this podcast a little bit higher in the ranking so I can help even more people just like you. And even share it with one more person you think would really benefit from this episode. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey you, if you're multitasking, come closer. Are you tired of obsessing over your texts from your partner? Are you constantly checking your phone every 5 minutes? Are you overthinking every message they send? Are you feeling abandoned when they don't text you back right away or take too much time to respond? Imagine feeling like this in 21 days. Calm when they're texting or when they don't text. No more anxious spirals. Knowing their silence really doesn't mean anything about your self-worth and that you're still safe. Watching your partner become more obsessed with you because of your new energy. That's exactly why I've created my mini course on text anxiety. The only one you'll ever need to learn how to stop obsessing over text in just 21 days or less. The first round of my beta course is open, so grab your spot before the price goes up. And let's transform your relationship anxiety one text at a time. How? Either find the link in my bio or jump over to my Instagram @themarriagecoach and comment under any of the posts the word text anxiety.